So we've been studying the precepts on Wednesday nights for the past 4 weeks. We have one more evening to go. We've been reading The Mind of Clover by Robert Aitken Roshi. And the first, third, maybe half of the book is about the 10 great precepts. And then he discusses some other ethical problems in the rest of the book. And Aitken Roshi has been called the Dean of American Zen because not only because he was one of the first American Zen masters, but because of his principled stance on many issues that have come up in the Zen community. So he was regarded as the ethical standard for Zen teachers for many years during the time that he taught. And he lived to a pretty good old age too. And he was a widely respected teacher during his lifetime and still is. And if you go to our founder's altar in the hall, you will notice that his picture is on the right side at almost by the door frame there. So we honor him at our founder's altar because our teacher had a special connection with him as well. So you might think he was kind of an uptight and puritanical kind of guy, but that's not the impression that you get from his book at all. His view of the precepts is very wide and compassionate. He says of the precepts, they are not commandments engraved in stone, but expressions of inspiration written in something more fluid than water. Written in something more fluid than water. How could anything be more fluid than water? So you get the impression that they're definitely not fixed and static, that the precepts are more of a flow, something that is in our life as a something to deal with whatever happens to arise. We have these to rely on. The precepts, he says, are enacted with mercy and compassion. And mercy is a word that we don't hear too often these days. Mercy is a word that we should use more often. So the precepts are enacted with mercy and compassion. Aitken Roshi also does not dwell so much on a literal interpretation of the precepts as prohibitions, but he often reframes them in his book as positive actions. And we've been talking about this in our class. For instance, the positive side, the positive aspect of not killing is encouraging life. So we can encourage life in other people. The positive aspect of not lying is telling the truth. So we tell the truth to each other in our Sangha. So instead of striving to refrain from a negative action to keep from lying, we can joyfully move into positive action in keeping the precepts. We can joyfully tell the truth. See where that gets you. That would be pretty interesting. So today, for just a short period of time, I want to investigate Aitken Roshi's teachings on the 6th and 7th precepts. Though the 6th is not discussing the faults of others, and the 7th is not praising yourself while abusing others. And the first requirement in keeping the precept of not discussing the faults of others, or any precept for that matter, is a quiet mind. And I thought it was really interesting that Aitken Roshi brought this up at the beginning of the chapter on not discussing the faults of others. He says to cut off the mind road is to experience total silence so that circumstances can be seen clearly and taken in cleanly, each one fresh and new. Not to cut it off, not to cut the mind road off, is to continue projecting one's own confused images on the world and then to cling to them. So let me just repeat that. To cut off the mind road is to experience total silence so that circumstances can be seen clearly and taken in cleanly, each one fresh and new. So when we sit in Zazen, if we allow ourselves to be actually present to what is happening in this very moment, and then that moment, and then this moment, over and over again, what comes in through our senses is pure sensation. And each one is fresh and new every time we receive it. Not to cut off the mind road is to continue projecting one's own confused images on the world and then to cling to them. So we're making up stories about what's happening out there or in here, and then we get stuck to them. We get attached to them. We want to repeat them to ourselves over and over again. So the first step in not discussing the faults of others is to clear our minds. In Roshi's tradition, in the Diamond Sangha that Aitken Roshi started, the quiet mind is attained by seeing through the koan mu, which is the koan that is generally given to beginning students. So mu is the barrier that you have to pass in order to move on to additional koans. In the Soto tradition, we simply sit with what is, and gradually the mind becomes quiet. Roshi says, and he talks about this a lot in the book, he comes back to this again and again. The realized mind is at rest and deals with things as they are. The ghost mind is noisy and deals with its own creations. The silent mind intuits directly and truly. These observations can be experienced as basic information, just the facts, ma'am, free of any moral judgment and on a par with her hair is brown. So there's no additional mind chatter in taking in these sensations. The realized mind is at rest. He talks about the mind at rest a lot. The ghost mind is noisy and deals with its own creations. So if we're not coming from this quiet mind, if we're not coming from this ground of being, we fall into dualistic mind. We fall into judgments about this and that. We fall into the habit of looking at things in black and white terms, making judgments about and attaching labels to those with whom we interact. We put our partners and our friends and our children and our neighbors in a box and say, aha, I've got you now. This is how you are. And we tell them how they are. And you've been on the other end of that too, I'm sure. Fault finding, says Aitken Roshi, is actually an act of rejection. So when we find fault with other people, we are actually pushing them away from us. When we label someone, we separate ourselves from them. We create an other. We make them smaller so they'll fit into the box that we have for them, and then we slap our label on top and we say, now I know what that person is like. And we never think about it again. I mean, this is really common right now in our culture. We have a cancel culture where people are taken apart online piece by piece, and their lives are destroyed by fault finding and labels. And we say, okay, this person is anti-Semitic, say, for example, and everyone piles on, and that person is erased. So this can be a very dangerous kind of mindset to get into, very dangerous, hurtful, wounding, and destructive. Aitken Roshi points out that a fault actually is a weak place in a person's character where they can actually begin to change. And if we hang on to that fault, if we persist in seeing that person as with that fault, then we block any attempt that they might make to change, which is, in other words, we are becoming part of the problem too. When we hold on to old perceptions of somebody, then we keep them from becoming anything else. And I know you've all experienced this as adults. When you go back to visit your family, you think, okay, I'm all grown up now. I have a profession. Everybody's going to recognize me as an adult when you go back to your family. Sorry, that's not going to happen. Mom and dad still see you through that perspective. They put a label on you when you were born, and it's never going to go away. And it does, within the family, it limits your ability to change and to relate differently to the people in your family. So that's how labeling someone keeps them from changing. So gossip within the Sangha, or talking about the faults of others within the Sangha, is a behavior that undermines intimacy and harmony, which is the task we have to cultivate intimacy and harmony. When we can't let go of our judgment of someone, we participate in maintaining their faults, and we block possibilities for personal growth. And we actively keep that person from curing their faults. So what is the positive aspect of this precept? Roshi says trust and intimacy are the skillful means to dispel separation and judgment. We can be forgiving and give each other a chance, or even 2 or 3, rather than leaping immediately into cancellation. We can perceive each other's faults and yet remain clear and compassionate and merciful within the silent mind. So when you find yourself condemning another person, whether it's in the Sangha or in the workplace or at home, in your relationship with your partner, stop and ask yourself, where is my trust? Where is my intimacy? How am I preventing this person's growth by maintaining this perception? What can I do to support and nurture this person instead. Another thing I was thinking of today is the Lojong practice in Tibetan practice. Tibetan mind training, there's this whole series of slogans that you concentrate on. So you can pick a slogan. I know somebody who had the Lojong slogans on a set of cards, and the cards would be sitting in the kitchen window. So she would take that card and she would display one card for a period of time, and she would work on that particular mind training slogan. So, but the one that always appealed to me was, don't ponder others. Don't ponder others. That pretty well covers it, as far as not discussing the faults of others. Just don't ponder others. You find yourself doing that during the day all the time. And so this slogan would come up for me, don't ponder others. And I would repeat that to myself and things would clear up for a while. So that's something that you could do too. So the 7th grade precept, not praising yourself while abusing others, seems to be just about the same as not discussing the faults of others, except for the emphasis on abuse. In this case, one not only points out the fault of the other person, but sets up this false dichotomy of I against you, where I'm better than you, and you are the problem. Not just labeling or judging, but actively seeking to foster division. I think this is where the real crux of this precept is that it's a mean kind of thing to do. So praising self, being arrogant about one's own accomplishments, and downplaying or tearing down another person. There's this meanness in that. The Sangha did not have to contend with electronic speech in Aitken Roshi's time. And today, you can destroy someone's life with a flick of a finger simply by pushing send, reaching a community of several thousand instead of just 1 or 2. How much more important is mindfulness in this context? How much more important is it that we're paying attention when we speak, either in person or electronically? And it's not just physical or electronic speech that requires our attention. What about those stories in your head where you're pondering others? I fall short of keeping this precept every single time I get in my car, muttering, grumbling about the idiots on the road, of which I, of course, am not one. If we already have a habit of abusing other people in our minds, it's much easier to give voice to such careless words. So where is the quiet mind when you're on the road? Where is the mind at rest? Both of these precepts are aspects of right speech and right action. Aitken Roshi suggests that we avoid haphazardous speech, careless or destructive speech. Just one person engaged in discussing the faults of others or praising themselves while abusing others can rip the fabric of the Sangha. And in the Sangha service that we did at Shasta Abbey, the people who created destruction within the Sangha were singled out for the worst punishments. Within the Sangha, we have the opportunity to pay attention to how we speak to each other and about one another. Are you providing other Sangha members with an opportunity to grow? Are you letting go of your own arrogance in order to cultivate intimacy? At the end of the chapter on not praising self, Roshi uses an example from the teachings of Buddha of a righteous community. All of these practices could be considered to be positive aspects of the seventh grade precept. And I'm going to read this directly from the book. I found it really interesting that the Buddha made note of this righteous community. So it's Shakyamuni Buddha's thoughts on a righteous society. Ajatasattu, king of Magadha, was contemplating attacking the Vaji tribe, but wasn't sure if he could bring it off. He sent a minister to the Buddha, who was camped at Vulture Peak, to ask him what he thought of the Vaji. Shakyamuni and Ananda conferred and agreed to the following points about the Vaji people. The Vaji people frequently gather together for conference, and many people attend such meetings. 2, the Vaji people gather in unison and act in unison to perform necessary tribal undertakings. 3, the Vaji people do not establish rules without precedent, nor do they break existing rules, but they live in accord with the traditional laws established in the past. 4, the Vaji people respect, revere, and venerate their elders and consider their advice worthwhile. 5, the Vaji people do not forcefully take and confine girls and women. 6, the Vaji people respect, revere, and venerate their holy places and do not forgo the custom of offerings. 7, the Vaji people provide protection, defense, and support for arhats, sages, and yogins, hoping that those who have not yet come will enter their territory, and those who reside there will peacefully continue to do so for as long as they may desire. And the Buddha said, as long as these 7 conditions are observed, the Vaji will prosper, and no decline can take place. The minister then remarked that if the Vaji observed even one among such conditions, the king of Magadha would not be able to raise a finger against them. It is said that the Buddha preached a number of times on these 7 conditions as they applied to his Sangha. So I thought a little bit about these and tried to translate them into modern practice, because our Sangha isn't exactly a tribe, but I guess you could call us a tribe too, if you wanted to. But it's a little bit different, different culture, different time. So these were the conditions then that I came up with for the righteous community. So 1, frequent gatherings and good attendance. 2, acting in unison to perform undertakings. 3, acting in accordance with established rules. So like Olympia Zen Center has a set of bylaws that the board uses to direct its actions. So we can change those, but we look at them whenever when an issue comes up and we're not quite sure what to do. Well, let's take a look at the bylaws. So we have these established rules, And we have established forms of practice that we also follow. Respecting the elders and taking their advice. Well, that's one that has kind of fallen by the wayside, I think, in our culture. I mean, as a person who's elderly, I certainly have noticed that there's not necessarily a lot of respect for gray hair. But, also I'm not expecting people to do that. But I think in our practice, we do practice respecting our elders, the teachers who have been around for a long time, and we go to them for advice. Respecting all people, regardless of personal characteristics of any kind. This is number 5. Respecting all people, regardless of personal characteristics of any kind. That's very important. And 6, respecting and caring for holy places and participating in ceremonies and practices. And finally, supporting and protecting spiritual expression in the wider community. And we do this here at Olympia Zen Center by participating in FAN, and we haven't had any visiting teachers lately, but we often had visiting teachers in the past. So we would bring in people from other traditions or other temples to speak with us, and we supported them in their practice too. So those are kind of some of the aspects of a righteous community. We practice an alternative way of being human in this world. Thank you, Bob. We step outside of our pulsating culture to cultivate a quiet mind, the mind at rest, from which we can speak in ways that support each other instead of speaking haphazardous words that rip and tear at the fabric of Sangha, of our family, of our workplace, and our intimate relationships. We can become a righteous community like the Vaji, acting in open-hearted ways while supporting the integrity of our community. We can enact the precepts with mercy and compassion. That's all I had for today. Perhaps you have some questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Kaylee?
That reminds me of Aitken Roshi's example, I think in the first or second precept, of a monk in the Sangha who was stealing. And instead of censuring or condemning the monk, the Sangha acted with compassion and sort of loved the monk through it. And that's what that reminds me of.
Yes, that was a good example
It was.
of not discussing the faults of another person, but instead allowing him to work through his need to take the possessions of others until he just got over it. Oh, Susie.
Thank you, Jikyo. My question is about patterns of behavior and trust and intimacy with someone when they have a pattern of behavior of making a similar mistake or hurting you or others in a consistent way. And without labeling them as they're this type of person or X type of person, but just noticing that they continue to act in a certain way, and they're aware that this is hurting others, but their behavior doesn't change. How can I develop intimacy with them without, I guess, placing myself in a situation to be hurt again?
Yes. I think the other important aspect of that is trust. And if you can't trust that person not to hurt you, then intimacy cannot arise. And I am not certain how to develop a general fix for that particular issue, because I think it's very specific to the people involved. In order to develop trust, I think there has to be truth telling involved as well. But there may be a point at which you do, in order to I'm choosing my words here, because I don't think you want to throw up a barrier to protect yourself. That's so it's a really complicated sort of thing when you know that person has hurt you before, and you feel like it's always possible that they will hurt you again because they haven't really changed their attitude. So to tighten up is our first instinct to protect ourselves. So I'd say that looking at the precepts, that you have to find a way within that particular relationship to bring some kind of resolution to it, or to bring it to an end. One of the two, one of those two things. That's what I'm thinking. What do you think?
Intuitively, I agree. But the thought of bringing an end to a relationship feels very much like the dichotomy and true rejection. If we're talking about discussing the faults of others as a rejection, you cut someone out completely, that just to me is like the most severe rejection. And so it's really hard for me to hold that with the idea of, no self and other and full intimacy.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult line to walk, and it's so situationally dependent of what kind of wounding is taking place, and how deep it goes, and whether it can be tolerated. I think it's a very deep question, but I think you're you're absolutely right that cutting off the relationship is certainly a rejection. Yeah. So where is the mercy and compassion? And also, you always have to take into consideration that you don't want to indulge in idiot compassion. So there's that aspect too. We do at some point also have to preserve our own being. So there's that balance between taking care of ourselves as a being and taking care of the other person as well. And where's the balance there? Yeah. Larry, did you have something? Okay. Karen.
Mickey did.
Sorry?
Mickey.
Oh,
This Karen.
yeah, this Karen.
When we're in a line, it's dangerous.
Well, I think you were reading my mind, maybe, but it's one that I struggle with, so I appreciate the question. And I recently did a trip to the South with family and very evangelical. And there's a part of me that tends to get tight and maybe a little angry and reactive. And so on this recent trip, I tried to bring, try is operative here, to keep an open heart so that I wasn't pushing away, trying to see the beauty and where there are areas of commonality. But one of the things that I'm aware of in that is that there has to be wisdom in that, and paying attention and awareness, which is also our practice, and paying attention so that we don't go, that we know we pay attention to what's happening and set limits when it's healthy for us to do it. I think about Roshi Joan Halifax's book, Standing at the Edge, and that's a really, she grapples with some of this. Anyway, it is a good question.
Yeah, no easy answer. Yes, Mickey.
I'm not suggesting that this is Susie's situation at all. I rather think it is not. But as women, sometimes we just have to leave.
You just have to what?
Leave.
Leave.
To
Oh,
protect ourselves.
yes,
Those situations arise.
yes. Mickey's
again-
noting that as women, sometimes we just have to leave if those situations arise.
That's all.
That was, okay. Dennis.
I'd like to add to that also that sometimes men just have to leave. I stayed in an abusive marriage for a little longer than I probably should have. But what I want to say is that I think we sometimes misunderstand what intimacy means. Intimacy, I think, doesn't necessarily mean staying in a close, emotional, sticky kind of relationship. It means holding the person in your heart with care for who they are, not projecting on them who you want them to be, and seeing clearly who this person is, holding them dear, regardless. But then maybe with wisdom establishing your outer relationship, however it has to be. That might be very close. It might be strictly professional. It might be, we need distance, but always in your heart, seeing that person as lovable. So
Did you hear that on Zoom? Did you hear that? Okay, good. Good. Yes.
I guess I'm asking, like, what's the best way to hold people, because I think accountability is compassionate. Just to, like, sometimes I've noticed that when I narrate what someone has done, that's very helpful for everyone around to be like, yes, this factual retelling of events that have happened and how it has affected people can be helpful. But yeah, I guess, like, I know I've definitely been in situations where, like, exiting is a good option. And I've been in situations where just, getting on the platform or just letting everyone around know, like, this person did this. So, and sometimes that's a lot safer for other people to be like, this person equally did this to me. And I think can be strength in, like, a lot of different options. But I guess sometimes, like, I think setting boundaries is compassionate and accountability, but I think sometimes, like, what's the best way to communicate that to other people? And I really try to communicate with only the people who I think are close, who need to know, and just let other things of, like, if things happen, it's not my business. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, what's your opinion on the best way to both be realistic and communicate, and to, like, hold people to, like, better standards, or to better teach people how to respect other people, or how to respect you? That's my question. I don't know.
I think there's always the danger in creating a group of people who know about the situation, of the whole cancel culture effect taking a place. So I think, I mean, it kind of depends on the situation too, because you may feel like you need to provide protection to someone. I think overall, though, it's best to resolve the situation on a one-to-one basis before one takes it to a wider community. That would be my instinct. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who just spoke about this, because it's a very important issue in any kind of community. And I wanted to say that it's very understated, kind of, but in so many ways, this exact conversation is the core of our practice, of our real, actual practice with each other, is this back and forth of how can we let everyone in and find a way to do that and have them in our hearts without dying or without having to hold them at arm's length forever. Because none of us want to do that with each other.
Yeah, I appreciated Dennis's description of that, in how you hold somebody dear in your heart, even if they're misbehaving, actually, and you have the wisdom to distance yourself appropriately from that person. So I think that's a really great thing to keep in mind, is that holding somebody dear in your heart is being intimate with them, even if you're not particularly intimate with them on a regular basis. Did you have your hands up?
Yeah.
Jordan.
Just real quick, I think and Dennis, really appreciate you sharing this idea of, instead of calling out, calling in. And that gives me kind of like a representation of what the act should kind of look like. Calling out is this separation. I'm saying you're this, I'm labeling you. It's very distancing, versus still acknowledging pain or misbehavior, but doing so in a calling in fashion. There's kind of like this come towards me, and hopefully there's like this trust and intimacy, and obviously keeping in mind of safety and those concerns too. But yeah, the trust and intimacy seems a lot more available in a calling in fashion versus a calling out.
That's a very good point. Yes, Karen, the other Karen.
A phrase I haven't heard so far is power and authority, and the role that those can play in these situations that I feel like many of us are, contributing to the dialogue around. And while I'm no fan of cancel culture, I do think in part it's a response to a disequal distribution of power and authority, and a grasping at any possible means to reduce someone, often someone in a place of authority. So one thought that came to mind is in the Me Too movement, is that we saw people with a lot of power and authority, those who had less power, taking upon themselves to find ways to hold those people who had created harm accountable. And it developed into something very public and very, a force all its own. And so I guess I would just ask for words of wisdom around this question of power and authority, and just unequal power and authority within relationships, intimate relationships, or voluntary relationships of voluntary association such as this, or governmental, like really big, expansive relationships.
I'm not sure I have any wisdom in that field. That's always the danger of accumulation of power, is that it can be abused, and it's the rare person that can resist the temptation to abuse it. So I think there are always those situations. And so we talked about labeling a person and the label preventing growth. So if we call out a person in authority and say, this is how you are, and this has been hurtful, where is the opportunity for growth in that person? Is there an opportunity for growth in that person? So I think in those kinds of situations, we have to be very, very careful as practitioners to make sure that we're not causing harm on the power side. So there's no balance there, because the power has the upper hand. So usually the only way that the unpowerful can make up for that is in numbers, and by calling out, by calling for accountability. I'm just not sure that solves the problem. I think that's where I'm at with that. I'm not sure it really solves the problem. It provides everybody with a chance to bring forward their wounding, and to perhaps experience some release of that. But how does it, that's my question back to you, how does it solve the problem.
Like, I guess my response would be, it feels like it's an iterative process of, as you described, sort of this truth telling of the masses happens. And then there's some kind of, whether it's institutional responses or governance responses or whatever, formalized responses, because it can happen simultaneous with cultural change. And I mean, it's many faceted.
Yeah,
And of course, each of those things starts with someone individually making a choice to behave differently.
Yeah, so it's more of a trigger process. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, and then that stuff emerges, and then there's, what I think unfortunately can happen is that then we sort of get comfortable, like, oh, we're creating some change here, and then we don't do another check-in, we don't do, how are we really adjusting?
Right. Yeah,
And then, so I think it's really, we need to really embrace a mindset of that constant checking in and change is how we will create a world that works for more people in a healthier way.
right. And I think, when we talk about trust and intimacy, we're always talking about not a power-based relationship. There isn't a one up and one down. Everyone is on the same level. And I know that seems really idealistic and possibly impossible. But I think if we continue to make that our Sangha task, that if we continue to work at it all the time, that something will come out of those efforts that is fair and reasonable, and in which, so that trust and intimacy and wisdom and accountability can all be connected together within the Sangha treasure, at least, if not elsewhere. Yeah. Yes, Calvin.
Jikyo, your talk this morning had me go back to, it just brought up something that I've really kind of forgotten about for a while. And it was around Christmas time several years ago, and I apologize to the Sangha that a lot of my stories and shared experiences have to do with prison, but when you spend 30 years or so, there's not much you can draw from, so,
That's your experience, Calvin.
but it was still valuable to me and valuable to other people. And in this particular time, it was around Christmas, and we as a unit got together and said, Christmas has been so depressing. Let's just change this. We're going to all dress up in our finest clothes, and we will put together some gifts, and we procured some wrapping paper, and we got food together, like crackers and cheese and sliced meats and so on, and all kinds of things, and everybody was really excited about this. We were concerned that the guards would think that we were organizing and would interfere and then send us to ourselves, but they didn't. And the day came, Christmas, and everyone was getting together, and everyone had been invited except for one person. And that individual he had to handle a bulldog. And the reason he was called that is because he was an extraordinarily aggressive person. He was huge, had a big barrel chest, just so strong, a very, very dark black man and very intimidating. And no one talked to him, ever, because of that and other reasons. So I went up to his door, and I don't know what caused me to do that. I went up to his door and I knocked on it, and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, we're having a Christmas party, and I don't think anyone's talked to you about it, but you're invited to come. And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because you are the only person that hasn't been invited. We want to make sure everyone gets invited." And he said, "I'll think about it." So when the time came and we all got together, we had like 5 tables. One was dessert, one was drinks, one was our raffle gifts and the food. And we all got together, and everyone was dressed really well, and I was amazed that people put in so much effort. And here comes Bulldog. He's dressed well, he's smiling, and we started talking. He goes, well, why'd you do that? I said, well, you know, some of the Buddhist people got together, and we thought it was a good idea and so on. And he had the best time you've ever seen. And he talked to people for the first time, and he got involved. He had been labeled as this horrible person, and actually he was funny, he was social, he had never been invited to anything. And he said, at the end of that, he said, you know, I kind of like y'all, how do you put it? Y'all Buddhist people are kind of cool. And I think sometimes it's about courage. Having the courage to go to the person or the people or the organization or the situation that is challenging and not be fearful that you could be rejected. But the alternative is, if you're not, then wonderful things happen.
Yeah.
And from that, I have loved to come up to people I don't even know and just talk to them and see what happens. Sometimes it doesn't work out well, but boy, when it does, it's great.
That's intimacy.
Exactly.
Thank you, Calvin. That's a great story. Well, I think we're probably approaching or past the time. I don't have a watch on, so thank you all very much for your comments and your questions. Thank you. It's been a great discussion. Yeah. Beings are numberless.